Hello and welcome to Hey Ask Me Stuff, the grand return of Hey Ask Me Stuff. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am Ken Coughlin. Thank you for joining us. Anybody that can watch us live this evening or after the fact. If it's your first time watching the show, well, then nothing looks different to you. If it is not your first time watching the show, then a lot probably looks different to you. We've been on hiatus for a little while, but we had some stuff, a lot of stuff going on, and I promised the last time we did a show here in studio that we'd be back in June. And we just made that under the wire with kind of a new look and a new feel to the program. Well, this is the new look and the new feel to the program. First thing you should notice is we are broadcasting still live, but now we're in the evening, whereas we used to be at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on Wednesdays. We're now going to be broadcasting 6:30 p.m. on Tuesdays, so that hopefully that makes it a little bit easier for some folks to join us live if you want to join in the chat. So, hey, before we go any further, let me ask you a quick favor. If you haven't already, can you go ahead and subscribe to the YouTube channel? Just go ahead, if you click that subscribe button, click the notifications. We've got a lot of great things on here. We're actually trying to get up to 2,000 subscribers, and so you can help us get there. If you haven't subscribed already, hey, what are you waiting for? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Help us get to that goal, get to 2,000 subscribers. We would really, really appreciate it. And, hey, tell your friends, tell your family, get them to come on as well. If you don't know me, my name is Ken Coughlin. I'm coming to you live from Trinity Lutheran Church in Joppa, Maryland. I am a Christian apologist. I'm also a lawyer and a lot of different hats around here. And so the purpose of the show here, Hey Ask Me Stuff, the vision behind it is for you out there in the internet world to get to ask me questions. And there's ways you can submit those questions ahead of time if you want to be one of our main topics here. And one of the ways you can do that is by going to this website that's on the screen, trinityjoppa.org/askmestuff. If you fill that out, go on there, there's a form that you can fill out and you can submit your question, anything about Christianity, the faith, anything like that you might have, you want to see me answer on a future episode of the show. Go ahead to that website, fill out the form, let us know what your question is, and you never know, you might be lucky enough to have your question selected for a future episode. I don't usually pick the questions. I leave that to wiser minds than me. I just answer them. That being said, we're also, as part of this new vision, we're doing things a little bit differently. We're still going to be, talking about your questions, answering your questions. We might also just talk about some things that are going on in the world. If there's something going on in current events that I kind of want to talk about, then we're going to talk about it. We'll chat about that. We're going to do that a little bit tonight. If there's not, then maybe we won't. But it's basically an idea. The idea here is just to have a conversation between Christians. Get on, or even non-Christians. You're not a Christian, you want to get online and talk to me. Get online, talk to me. All right. So current event stuff, we'll talk about that. We're going to talk a little bit about the Oceangate Titan submersible, the submarine implosion here today, and some of the reaction to that. And then we'll get into our main topic, our main question for the evening. So you're invited to join in, be part of the conversation. I do want to give a quick shout out to B.A. Thomas. Those of you that watched the show before, you know that he was the producer, and he was always actually in this chair, which was the producer's chair. And then I was over there through that window in the studio side of things. And then he would manage everything from here. Well, since we moved this to the evenings, I'm kind of a one-man show. And so you see me looking off to the side here. That's because I got all my screens over here and I got my stream deck that I'm controlling everything on. So I'm making all the switching and doing all of that and bringing up all the graphics myself. But BA designed all of this. He did all the legwork ahead of time to make these wonderful, cool graphics and these cool options we have to give us this new look to the show. So if you know BA, see BA, say thank you to BA for doing that. Really appreciate it. All right. So last thing I'll say, and then we'll get started here, is that you are also invited, if you're watching us live, to be part of the conversation. If you do that, you can comment in the live chat on YouTube. We're on the Trinity Joppa YouTube channel. Your chat will appear on the screen as long as I got everything working here correctly. And then I'll also see it on my screen here, and we can actually interact. So if you're watching the show live and you have any questions, comments, you agree with me, disagree with me about anything we talk about tonight, go ahead and throw your thoughts there in the live chat, and let's talk about it. Let's have a live conversation back and forth. If you're not watching it live, well, hey, throw your comment in the comment section of the video after the fact, and we'll take a look at it, and who knows, maybe we might be able to talk about it on our next show the following week. All right, so to get things started, what I wanted to do here, now I got to remember, to push the right button here as we go along. I wanted to talk a little bit about the submarine issue. Most of you have been following the news for the past week. You saw that the Oceangate is a company that offered for $250,000 approximately the opportunity to get into their little submersible, the little tiny sub, and go down and tour the wreckage of the Titanic on the bottom of the seafloor, the ocean floor. Well, obviously, we had tragedy recently where initially they lost contact with their submersible with a number of people on board, and then it eventually came out that the sub actually imploded, killing everyone on board. But what some of the news stories that actually kind of got to me and made me want to talk about it a little bit on the show, especially a Christian show that's meant to be talking to Christians, were more some articles about the response and the way a lot of people responded to what was seen in that what happened, the events that happened, how people responded online to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up a few articles here, and then we'll take a look at them so you can see what I'm talking about. This first one here, this is from NBC News, and it says the search for Titanic submersible unleashes eat the rich sentiment online. As memes spread across social media, some said they felt the dark humor was ill-timed and in poor taste. And I'm not going to read the entire article, but I want to look at a few highlights if you're not familiar with the story. And this is by Saba Hamedi. Like I said, this is NBC News, published on June 22nd. She says, at first, news that a submersible had gone missing during a voyage to the Titanic wreckage site ignited a wave of shock and concern. The 5 people on board, now presumed dead, faced a dwindling oxygen supply in a harsh and unforgiving environment deep underwater. But as more details emerged about the wealth of those on board, the known concerns with the Titan submersible, and comments from the CEO that seemed to disregard safety, empathy gave way to crass humor, with memes mocking the victims appearing across platforms, including Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. And then the article goes on to give a few examples here. It's crazy to think we might only have another 30 hours or so of being able to make fun of the people on the submarine, said one TikTok user in a video uploaded Tuesday that has 1.4 million views. All right. And then, interesting note here, it says research has shown that many use humor and memes to cope with tragedy. But as jokes surrounding the missing vessel circulated online, some said they felt the dark humor was ill-timed and in poor taste, given that the rescue operation was ongoing. I don't know why it would be in poor taste even after the rescue operation was over. But hey, it is what it is. And then there's another article here from Fox News here that gives a few more examples of some of the memes. Like here's one that was posted with, the killer whale says, I have nothing to say but eat the rich. And next time some rich white person wants to take Sam Alito on an expensive trip, please tell him to take him to see the Titanic. I mean, hopefully, as Christians, we can see that some of this is just woefully inappropriate. Matter of fact, I had a couple others here that I was going to pull up that I found online. We have this one that I saw. We all died in a homemade submarine, a homemade submarine, a homemade submarine. Which obviously is a reference to the Beatles song Yellow Submarine, Yellow Submarine. And then there's also this one, Alexa, play Air Supply. I mean, I would hope that we can all agree that these are frankly disgusting. These are appalling type of images. But the deeper question is, why are people reacting this way? And what is appropriate for us as Christians? I mean, I don't know if anybody out there has, had any, if you've come across any of these memes and how you reacted to them, or if you posted any of these memes. But that's kind of why I wanted to bring it up, because, you've probably heard a million times we're supposed to be in the world, but not of the world. And so is this one of those instances where we should be thinking about how we should be reacting to this type of thing when we see it go on? And I saw this article here. This was, again, another article on Fox News that was talking about a psychologist trying to explaining why she thinks anyway, people were finding humor in these memes. And keep in mind, this isn't like one of the other ones I mentioned. This isn't even after the submarine was recovered. This was while we still didn't know whether or not it was going to be recovered. Or I should say, what it was before the remnants of the submarine were recovered. It was before we even knew. And so we were kind of had this. The media kind of created this ticking clock where we're like, tick, tick, tick. Is it going to? Are they going to run out of air? Are they going to run out of air? And while this is going on, and while, as far as we knew, people could very well have been suffering and potentially getting close to suffocation, that's when all these memes that I was showing you were circulating and were going around. And so we have this article here where it says the psychologist explains these online attacks against victims of the Titanic sub-tragedy by saying our culture lacks empathy. And I'm going to scroll down past all of the details of what happened. We've talked about that already. But here's a couple other ones. We talked about the Eat the Rich one. It says, why does it seem so hard to feel sorry here for the rich people that might die in that submersible? That was one Reddit thread that asked. And then here's what the psychologist actually says. Her name is Michelle Solomon. She says, highlight this right here. Too far. Let's go up, go up, go up, go up. There we go. Take a look at this. She says, I really think right now our culture lacks a lot of empathy. And I have to look at these social media companies. These big tech companies created these social media platforms for fast scrolling. They care about time online, not time well spent, said clinical psychologist Michelle Solomon. And it's a problem because the younger generation who spends hours online, they're the ones that are going to be carrying on our society. That's problematic. That's scary. She referred to a feature such as fast scrolling on social media, meaning flipping through reels, videos, and images on recommended pages tailored for a user's interests as a recipe for disaster. And when you're fast scrolling on social media, you're disconnecting from your feelings. You're disconnecting from the part of you that has empathy for another person, even well-intentioned people, she said. If you're scrolling fast enough and you're not disconnecting from what actually happened, you would find something funny. And then you'd scroll on to the next thing without processing it. And here's why I bring this up. I mean, I don't know whether or not there's any support for her theory that, it's the fast scrolling through social media that leads to this. I mean, I can certainly see her point that when we're going through this information so quickly, where we live in a clickbait culture, right? Where you're just clicking on this headline to that headline to that headline, that we never really take the time to process what we're reading. And oh my gosh, I can't tell you as a Christian apologist how often I see this. So many of our views, of our opinions are held. I got to think without thinking them through. People hold so many beliefs that are they completely contradict each other. And a lot of them just aren't well reasoned whatsoever. And I think a lot of that is because of what she's talking about, this fast scrolling culture, this mentality, where we don't take the time to process. We don't take the time to think. We might see a headline that is something that we want to agree with, we want to be true. And so we just convince ourselves it is true without actually thinking it through and seeing if the logic actually holds up. A similar thing could be going on here where we see something that we find funny initially, but we never take the time to process whether it really is funny or whether it's something we should be laughing at. And so we go on and we repost these memes, or maybe some people even make them themselves. And I got to say that I do think, regardless of whether or not this whole idea of fast scrolling is what's contributing to it, I do think she has an absolutely legitimate point in the sense that we are seeing growing more and more daily in our culture a lack of empathy, where people do not seem to find anything wrong with just being openly disrespectful and mocking of other people's oftentimes most preciously held beliefs. I had somebody that I am acquainted with, I'm not going to get too specific. I don't want to call anybody out here online. But this individual had moved into a new home and was decorating this home and had indicated that they were going to decorate their guest bathroom, okay, the bathroom that's designed for their guests to come into, all right, in a manner that they openly admitted. They said point blank, I know that this manner of me decorating is going to highly offend a large number of my guests. That several of my guests are going to find this just to be completely offensive. But the individual went on to say, but I don't care because I think it's funny. All right. I think it's funny. And that's the kind of thing that I think also is contributing to these memes that we're seeing circulating around about this tragedy, is that people lack empathy. They're finding humor in things that, frankly, they shouldn't be finding humor in. We've lost the ability to empathize with other people, and whether we agree with them or not. And what's I guess not so surprising, but part of that is, of course, when we all want people to empathize with us. More these same people that you'll see posting these memes and telling these jokes and doing these things that they know are going to offend other people just because they find them humorous. If you do something that they consider wrong to them, they'll be the first ones to turn around and say, oh, well, that was wrong. You shouldn't do that. That's not the right way to treat me. Well, I don't know, other than obviously we're all sinful, and we're maybe getting closer to when Jesus is going to return. I don't know that. Nobody knows that. But it is a disturbing trend that I'm seeing, and it is certainly a trend that is not what we as Christians should be doing. All right. This should go without saying, right? Just a couple of scriptures here that I'm going to pull up. This is Luke chapter 6, verses 27 through 28. This is Jesus talking. But to you who are listening, I say, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who mistreat you. Obviously, if you take Jesus' words seriously as a Christian, then that should tell you no matter how you feel about it. Maybe you hate all rich people. I don't think you should, but maybe you do. All right. Even if you hate all rich people, you should still be loving them. That maybe sounds like some of a contradiction to say if you hate them, you should love them. You're right. You should love them. Love is an action. It's something you do. But we as Christians, clearly based upon Jesus' command here, should not be participating in this type of thing. And we certainly should not be creating these types of memes. We should not be openly mocking people just to get some kind of enjoyment out of their offense, out of their displeasure. And we shouldn't even be sharing. We really should be checking ourselves. If we find ourselves laughing at this type of stuff, then yeah, that's probably something that we should be repenting for. When you're saying your prayers to God and you're confessing your sins, then that is something that you should be confessing. Why? Well, you look at Genesis 1:27. What's it say? So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. All of us are made in the image of God, and that comes with a certain amount of dignity that every person possesses. Now, does that mean everyone's saved? No, of course it doesn't. All right. But it does tell us as Christians how we should be treating other people. 1 Peter 3:15, I didn't put this one on the screen, but, tells us that, always be prepared to give an answer to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that you have, but do this with gentleness and respect. And that's something that I do think that we as the Christian church sometimes lose sight of, that we maybe haven't been doing as good of a job with that as we should, that we sometimes allow ourselves to get caught up in the spirit of the world and do things that the world says is okay. And we think that this is an appropriate way for us to evangelize, for us to spread the faith. And no, many times the answer is no, it's not an appropriate way to be spreading the faith. And it's not all harmless fun. That's another thing you hear all the time. Oh, it's just harmless fun. Why can't we just have a little bit of fun here? I'm just joking. It's just joking. Just take, you're so stuffy, don't be so serious, lighten up. We hear all those types of things all the time. But it's not just something that's that's light and harmless. If you're finding yourself finding amusement in someone else's misfortune, then there's a problem with that. So anyway, that's what I wanted to say when I was reading those articles about the reaction that people have had. I just wanted to make sure that I kind of came on here and talked about any Christians that are watching and saying, no, that's not appropriate. We shouldn't be participating in that. no matter how you feel about the people who were in that submarine, we shouldn't be celebrating their suffering. We shouldn't be celebrating their deaths. And we certainly should not be making light of it and mocking it and trying to brush it all off. It's like, oh, ha, 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 it's just a joke. How would you feel if you were the one in the submarine and you came in, if we had rescued them, for example, and they came out and they found out this is how our culture was reacting when they were in there? Is that treating people with the dignity and respect that they deserve as being made in the image of God? I say no. I say no. All right. Well, with that, what we are going to do is we are going to move on to our next topic. So, well, got to push right again. You apologize. I'm still learning all the buttons here and making sure I'm getting all the buttons correct. So our main topic, and this is one that was submitted actually way back. This was submitted on our website before we took our hiatus. And what I did is Sarah Garner kind of sent me all of the questions that people had submitted online through that website. What was that website again? It was that. Well, hold on. I didn't actually transition it. How about we do that? There we go. That's what it was. So remember, if you got a question you want to have us answer here on the air, go ahead and send it to trinityjoppa.org/askmestuff. Fill out the form that's on there. All right. So the question was, is it wrong to portray God in media? Now, this is a question that goes back a very, very long time. I mean, think about it. You've probably seen a lot of very famous Renaissance paintings that depict God or depict, Jesus, and Jesus is God. He is the one member of the Trinity, the Son, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. So the depiction of Jesus is, in that sense, a depiction of God. And of course, as time has gone on, we see a lot more than just, paintings. And nowadays, you get into movies, Excuse me, I'm a filmmaker, so this is something that is near and dear to my heart that I do an awful lot. And so the question is, well, what about in movies? And why? Maybe you're I haven't explained thoroughly. Maybe you're wondering right now, well, why would it be considered a sin? Why would it be considered a problem to create a depiction of God? And here's why. And this is where people get it from. And this is the second commandment. All right. And it appears both in Exodus and Deuteronomy. It's exactly the same in both of them. All right. And it says, you shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. And I mean, it's the prohibition against idolatry, right? We've heard this before. And so the question is, well, if I make a painting of Jesus, or I create a movie, The Passion of the Christ, or the Chosen, the Netflix series, The Chosen, are there problems with those? Are we committing idolatry if we create a movie that inevitably, what's it going to do? It's going to have a human being that's going to be playing the role of Jesus. That human being is not Jesus, all right? Jesus is God. So are we therefore essentially creating an idol by having that human being who is an earthly thing, this thing that's on earth, right, depicting God? All right, is that run afoul of the prohibition against idolatry? Well, it's a question that has, I don't want to say divided the church per se, but there are definitely differences of opinion about the answer to this question within the Christian church, within the Orthodox Christian church. You've got some, by and large, your Reformed, your Presbyterian tradition, all right, John Calvin, etc., will say, yes, that's idolatry. As a matter of fact, to create any image of God per se is idolatry. Let me bring this up here. As a matter of fact, before I show you that, let me show you this. This is a quote from the Westminster Larger Catechism. If you're not familiar with that, that is this is written in 1647 by the Westminster Assembly. Westminster Assembly kind of was brought together to kind of define these, make these statements of faith for the Church of England. The Westminster Confession was the first thing that came out of that. And then there was also the shorter and the larger catechism, Westminster Catechism, that came out of that. And these are some of the defining books of the or works of the Presbyterian tradition. For those of you that don't know me, I grew up Presbyterian, and so I've got my book of order. I still have. I was an ordained elder in the Presbyterian Church, and I still have my book of order sitting on my shelves. I think I actually have 2 copies of the book of order sitting on my shelf at home. So I grew up with the Westminster Catechism, Westminster Confession as one of the more foundational definitions of my faith. And here's what the Westminster Larger Catechism says about idolatry and paintings and images. It says the sins forbidden in the second commandment, because what I just read you is the second commandment, are the making any representation of God, of all or of any of the 3 persons, either inwardly in our mind or outwardly in any kind of image or likeness of any creature whatsoever. All right. I want to make sure we emphasize just how significant that is. This is John, this is the outworkings of John Calvin's theology, supposedly, where it says, if you make any image of God, any whatsoever, which of course Jesus is God, so making an image of Jesus would be making an image of God, then you are committing idolatry, period. All right? And it says, no, that doesn't matter. There's no distinction between whether you make that image inwardly or outwardly. So even inwardly in your mind, if you try to create a mental picture of Jesus in your mind, then that is idolatry. I mean, and I want you to think through for a second before we dive more into the specific answers to this question about just how far in scope that answer in the catechism is. Let's say that you're reading your Bible and you're reading the story about the woman caught in adultery, all right? And it's narrating the story. And so it talks about this crowd, they bring up this woman. And so now what do you have in your head? You have a picture of the crowd, you have a picture of the woman. They throw her to the ground or whatever, and they've all got stones, all right? So now you have a picture of the stones in their hand. But of course, who are they bringing her to? They're bringing her to Jesus. And we read things in there about how Jesus reacts to this. We read in there that, Jesus starts, drawing in the sand or drawing on the ground in the dirt. So my question to you then is, if we're to take this prohibition of the Westminster Larger Catechism seriously, what needs to be going through your mind when you're reading that story in Scripture or someone's describing it to you, all right? You can have in your mind, it's okay to have a mental picture of this crowd of people. You can picture the stones. You can picture the woman lying on the ground there. But you know what you can't picture? You can't picture Jesus. So when in this mental picture you have created in your mind, there actually has to be like a blank spot, all right, where Jesus would be. And a matter of fact, I mean, you're even allowed to picture the moving of the dirt as he's drawing in the dirt, all right? But don't picture the finger. You can't picture his finger pointing into that dirt and actually drawing in it, because that then crosses the line into idolatry. I'm probably tipping my hand a little bit here with how I'm discussing this about where my view has shaped up over the years on this issue. But I want to try as best I can to fairly represent the argument both ways. All right, and so I'm going to bring up an article here. There we go. From a website called Purely Presbyterian. All right, that I think does a really good job laying out the objection to any images and why, and the argument for why it would be committing idolatry to have any images of Jesus. And this article actually gives 3 reasons why it's idolatrous to have any image whatsoever. And no paintings hanging on the wall, no chosen TV show, no movies, nothing like that. All right. The first reason that the author here gives is this one. It says there are 2 parts in the second commandment. Do not make an image of God, verse 4, and do not worship God with the use of images, verse 5. All right. So, and then they go on here to provide a quote from John Calvin's commentary on Exodus, which outlines basically exactly that, what this author actually said. So this is interesting, and this is the first reason, I've seen this a lot. You watch a lot of YouTube videos on this, and you can read a lot of articles on this, and you're going to see people, who are arguing on both sides within the Christian church. But this is one reason that comes up pretty much by just about everybody who thinks it is idolatry to do this. But what's interesting, essentially, look at what this is doing. This is basically subdividing the second commandment into two different commandments. You could almost say that it ends up being 11 commandments, but at a minimum, it's like commandment 2A and commandment 2B. And what the author here is claiming, and what John Calvin was claiming, was that there's this first part in verse 4, which just says, do not make an image of God. All right. And there's a second part in verse 5 that says, do not worship God with the use of images. All right. So let's take a look here at the two verses. Supposedly, according to this argument, the first verse, verse 4, stands for the proposition, do not make an image of God. All right. So here it is on Bible Gateway, where you can actually see the verse markers. All right. And where they change. And you look at what verse 4 says. Verse 4 says, you shall not make for yourself an image in the form of, does it say God? No, it doesn't, does it? It says, you shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the waters below. Full stop. That's the end of verse 4. All right. So the first response I have to the argument that, that was raised in that purely Presbyterian article is that that's just not what verse 4 says. I mean, you said that verse 4 first sets out that a prohibition says you shall not create an image of God. It doesn't say that. It says you shall not create an image of anything in heaven above, or on earth beneath, or in the waters below. So if we're to assume, as this argument goes, that any image whatsoever that's created of Jesus is per se idolatrous, but then we look at this verse, then what we would have to conclude is, I'm sorry, but that means that any image of anything is idolatrous. So under that argument, I hate to break it to you, but if anybody who's watching this program right now, you're committing idolatry. Why? Because you're not looking at me myself. You're looking at some type of a screen that is creating an image of me. And I got news for you. I am something on earth. All right. And so under verse 4, you right now are looking at an image of something on the earth, namely me, or my microphone, or the studio. All this is stuff that's on earth. You're looking at an image of it. You're committing idolatry if we are to say that verse 4 is supposed to stand for the proposition that any image whatsoever per se is always idolatrous, because it's not just limited to God, like the author had actually said there. And looking at this article here, this is an article on by thirdmill.org. And I'm trying to see if we've got the author's name. Let's scroll down. Yeah, the author is Ra McLaughlin. Give credit where credit is due. And he does a really good, I think, job of explaining that the ramifications of this viewpoint of if you think that that verse 4 just stands for a blanket prohibition against creating images, period. And he says this. He says, highlight this right here. As I understand the passages in Exodus and Deuteronomy, they prohibit the making and worshiping of false gods. They do not specifically prohibit the use of images in the worship of God, I should say, let alone the making of images for purposes other than worship. For example, if I were to paint a picture of a flower, my action would not violate this commandment, even though the commandment specifically forbids making any likeness of what is on the earth. The purpose and function of the image is critical to determining the propriety of the image. But if we interpret the commandment as prohibiting all images, regardless of their use, then we can paint nothing in creation. We cannot take photographs of our children. We cannot put pictures of products in advertisements. We cannot watch television or movies of any type, or take x-rays, or use an electron microscope. I want to take another look back here at the actual second commandment. This is the problem that arises when you try to subdivide the second commandment into two different commandments, essentially, is what they're doing. It's not two different commandments. It's one. Verse 5 illuminates what is intended by verse 4. And I will also point out that in the original Hebrew, there's no punctuation. So if you're looking at this on the screen right now and you're seeing, well, there's a period at the end of that sentence of verse 4. Not in the original, there's not. All right, there's no punctuation there. That's stuff that we add in later as part of our English translation, okay? But there was no break in thought. And those verse markers weren't there either. That wasn't added until, 1.5 centuries later. All right. So from the New Testament, actually, this is Old Testament, so even longer than that. So there's no break in thought in the original. And if we read on into verse 5, now we see the point. All right. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. All right. Context is important when interpreting scripture. Surrounding context, which is what we looked at here, looking at the surrounding verses around the verse you're looking to interpret. So is historical cultural context. What was going on in the world at the time, so you can understand what was the problem that God was seeking to address. And in this case, the problem that God was seeking to address was the fact that all these pagan nations around them were literally making statues, all right? And they were saying these statues are our God, and they would have gods for different localities. Different regions would have different gods, and they were seen as maybe competing against each other. And is your God, my God, stronger than your God? Nanny, boo, boo, that kind of stuff, all right? But they would create these statues, and they say, that statue, that golden calf, all right, is my God. And then I would bow down and worship that actual statue. That's what God is prohibiting here. He's not prohibiting the creation of any images of anything whatsoever, which I'm sorry, if you're subdividing and splitting verse 4 and verse 5, you cannot say verse 4 only applies to God. By its own terms, it doesn't. It's much broader than that, all right? These are part of the same commandment. You shall not create these images of anything in heaven above or on earth below or in the waters below for the purpose of worshiping them. All right, and that's what verse 5 explains. All right, if your purpose in creating this image is not to worship the image, all right, not to somehow say that image is God and therefore I'm going to worship that image, then the second commandment here doesn't apply to that. And that applies to movies as well. If your intention in making the movie is you're not worshiping the actor who's playing Jesus, you're not worshiping the image on the screen. Now, viewing that may certainly cause you to worship God, but the direction your worship is flowing, if you want to say, when that happens, is not at the movie screen, it's up to God. All right? So, so you have to read those two verses in conjunction with each other. Now, I want to give a couple other examples here, I say, to kind of back me up, all right? I say, for example, that first verse 4, all right? First of all, it's just not a fair reading of the language, no matter what language you're reading it in, Hebrew or English, all right? It's not a fair reading of the language to say verse 4 is only talking about images of God, because it explicitly says otherwise, all right? It says any images of anything, period. Why do I know that God cannot be saying that we should not make images of anything? Because elsewhere in the Bible, God himself commands his people to do it, all right? He's not going to contradict himself. God is not going to tell you, don't do something, and then turn around and say, now do it, the exact same thing, all right? And if we look here what I have on the screen, and this is particularly timely with the new Indiana Jones movie coming out later this week, speaking of depictions of God and all that, this is God giving instructions for the Ark of the Covenant and the building of the Ark of the Covenant. And look what he says here in Exodus chapter 25, verses 18 through 20. All right. God says, and make 2 cherubim out of hammered gold and at the ends of the cover. There's the cover on top of the ark, all right, the atonement seat. Make 1 cherub on one end and the second cherub on the other. Make the cherubim of one piece with the cover at the 2 ends. The cherubim are to have their wings spread upward, overshadowing the cover with them. The cherubim are to face each other, looking toward the cover. What are cherubim? They're angels. All right, I'm not getting to more of a detailed explanation. That they're angels. All right. So God here is explicitly telling the Israelites that when you're making the atonement cover for the Ark of the Covenant, you are to make a graven image of 2 cherubim on top of it. All right. Well, but I thought that the second commandment said we're not supposed to make any graven images whatsoever, period. Well, obviously that can't be what it said, because here we have God explicitly commanding his people to make a graven image. Now, are they supposed to worship those cherubim? No. And that's the point of distinction, is whether you're worshiping them or not. Here's another example. All right. from Numbers chapter 21, verses 4 through 8. All right, and this is the bronze snake. I've given you a few verses here leading up to the actual creation of the bronze snake to give you some context. For those of you that aren't familiar with the story, this is after the Exodus and they're wandering in the wilderness, okay? The Israelites are wandering the wilderness. It says they traveled from Mount Hor along the route to the Red Sea to go around Edom. But the people grew impatient on the way. They spoke against God and against Moses and said, "Why have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? There is no bread, there is no water, and we detest this miserable food." Then the Lord sent venomous snakes among them. They bit the people, and many Israelites died. The people came to Moses and said, "We sinned when we spoke against the Lord and against you. Pray that the Lord will take the snakes away from us." So Moses prayed for the people. The Lord said to Moses, "Make a snake and put it up on a pole. Anyone who is bitten can look at it and live." And so that's exactly what Moses did. He made a snake out of bronze and put it up on a pole. And anyone who looked at it and they were bitten, they survived. Now, did they worship that snake? No. Now, at this point, teaser for where we're going. No, they didn't worship that snake. All right. But obviously, again, the second commandment can't mean do not make any graven image whatsoever. I'm now giving you two examples where God specifically said to make a graven image. Now, remember what I've suggested is that you read verse 5 in conjunction with verse 4 to illuminate verse 4. And then that's when we see that the point God's trying to make is you should not make graven images for the purpose of worshiping them as gods. All right. And here's more evidence of that. Then we get to 2 Kings 18:4. Now, what's going on here in this context is Hezekiah, who was 25 years old, relatively young guy. Well, maybe not by those standards at the time. He became king of Judah, the southern kingdom, and he wanted to do right by the way of God. So he was tearing down all of the pagan stuff that was all around the nation of Judah right at that point in time. And then we get to this, and we see what he's doing to try to redirect the Israelite people back to the worship of the one true God. He says he removed the high places, which is where they were worshiping. People thought that in order to worship your gods, you had to get up really, really high, all right? Kind of like Tower of Babel kind of thing. He removed the high places, smashed the sacred stones, and cut down the Asherah poles, all things used to worship pagan gods. He broke into pieces the bronze snake Moses had made. For up to that time, the Israelites had been burning incense to it. It was called Nehushtan, all right? So what we saw happened is God told Moses to make the bronze snake, and that was a good thing. But then over time, the Israelites actually started worshiping the bronze snake in the same way they would worship an idol. And when that happened, Hezekiah says, "You've crossed the line. Now we destroy the snake." Right? And it was destroyed. And again, the distinction there was, were they using it for worship? All right. So that was the first reason that the long answer to the first reason that this not just this one website I was talking about, but a lot of people will say out there is that there's this subdivision, this attempt to subdivide the second commandment into two parts. Let me bring this up again so we can see the second reason that this, and the last two aren't as long, but here's the second reason that this author and a lot of people give for why they think it is sinful to create any image of Jesus, whether that be in movies, whether it be in paintings, anything like that. And let's see. So there's some truth to the connection between making a visual depiction of God and worshiping God by it. So this author making, a little bit of a concession, say, okay, I can see there's a little bit of a distinction you could make between just making an image and then actually worshiping that image. All right. But then we get to where they say, well, but that's not really true. You can't, they said that's a distinction without a difference. You think you're not worshiping it, but you really are. And the author here says the excuse that images of God are not being used for worship is necessarily untrue, because we are to revere and worship God with all our heart, soul, and might, Deuteronomy 6:5. If a picture of Christ does not stir up devotion, it is in vain. If it stir up devotion, it is a worshiping by an image or picture, and so a palpable breach of the second commandment. All right? In plain English, what is this second argument saying? It's saying, look, when you um, when you look at a painting of Jesus, or you're watching a movie, maybe you're out watching the Chosen, all right? Well, if it's not stirring up feelings of adoration for God in your heart, then it's a pretty bad depiction anyway, right? And it's pretty pointless. But if it is stirring up adoration in your heart, all right, then you are essentially committing idolatry, because now the reason you're having this adoration is through that image. You're actually, in a sense, worshiping God now through that image that you're actually seeing. All right, so does this argument hold up? Does the fact that, obviously we want, when people are making movies about Jesus, when Christians at least are making movies about Jesus, they want to try to, spread the gospel. They want to tell people about his truth. They want to try to, make people, get people to come to Christ, to learn the truth about him. But if that's successful, then does that all of a sudden make it idolatry? Because they did that came about through the use of images, including images of Jesus. Well, again, the problem with this line of thought is it goes back that their second argument is kind of dependent upon the first one. Remember, the first argument, they tried to say that the commandment is actually subdivided, all right? And the verse 4 says that you shouldn't make any image of God. And so then they go on and say, well, you made an image of God, and so now you're creating feelings of adoration through that image, so therefore it's idolatry. But we already talked about the fact that verse 4 isn't just limited to images of God, all right? It says limited images of anything, all right? So if this second argument is to hold true based upon the plain language of verse 4, what we've got to say is, okay, so if your heart is moved towards worship of God through anything that is in the heavens above or on earth or the seas below, then it's idolatry. Well, let me ask you a simple question. Let's suppose you're reading your Bible. This is one of my Bibles. This is the one I'm reading right now. So let's say I'm sitting down and reading my Bible. And in the course of reading my Bible, I have feelings of worship. I have feelings of stirring up devotion, as the article said there, in my heart as a result of reading my Bible. This Bible is, this is a leather cover, which comes from Cal, all right? I don't know if it's real leather or not. It's got paper, which is from trees, right? This is something that's on earth, all right? Or heaven forbid, you're, again, surfing the internet, reading the Bible on the internet when you're doing this, or a digital copy. Now you're not even looking at the book, but a depiction of the book, all right? And through that, all of a sudden, your heart has been stirring up towards devotion of God. You've committed idolatry. You've broken the second commandment, because something, a depiction or something, an image of something here on earth, all right, has stirred up devotion for God in your heart. So this is why the argument makes no sense, because we don't say that we're committing idolatry if we use a book, the Bible, and through the use of that book, we start having feelings of adoration for God. And it makes no more sense to say that if we use a movie or a painting, all right, and that's what causes us to stir up devotion in our hearts, that is now somehow becoming idolatry. They're all things that were created here on earth, and therefore they're all under that broad language that we saw really is in verse 4. There's no distinction there. And so that obviously can't be what's going on. And it gets back to what I said before. If I'm watching a movie with Jesus in it, all right, and I start having feelings of worship and adoration, the direction my worship is going is not at the movie screen, all right? It's up to heaven. It's to God, all right? So just because I happen to be seeing this, it's no more so than if I see somebody, do a really kind thing in the name of Christ. And as a result of that, that makes me appreciate Jesus more, all right? Well, the fact that I happen to be looking at them when those feelings, this person doing this kind thing for someone else, when these feelings start stirring up my heart, that doesn't make it idolatry. That doesn't mean I'm worshiping that person. I'm not worshiping that person. I'm worshiping Jesus and admiring the work that Jesus has done in their heart to get them to do that very noble thing, all right? So the second reason doesn't hold up either. All right, moving on to the third reason, the third and final reason that this author gives, and this is the third one that I've seen going around a lot, as far as why people think it is idolatry to create any image whatsoever of Jesus. And this is one that's just a logical error. I mean, there's really no other way to put it. It's pretty simple to address. In this article, it's expressed this way: God is spirit, and cannot be imagined. It is an ontological impossibility. Agreed. 100% agreed. All right. In other words, God is invisible. All right. You can't possibly picture God because there's no picture you can create. God is spirit. He is immaterial. All right. Even if you're trying to, and I've seen that one variation on this sometimes, is you can't possibly get an accurate picture of Jesus because there's no description of Jesus in the Bible. We have no idea what Jesus looked like. So any mental picture you create of Jesus is, unless you are the luckiest person on the face of the earth, all right, is going to be inaccurate. It's going to be wrong. All right. On that, I wholeheartedly agree. We are on the same page so far. But then the author goes on here and says, and therefore it is sinful to attempt. Based on what? Based on what? I mean, that's there's a logical leap there. Just merely saying it's impossible, that we can't possibly know what Jesus looked like, doesn't mean it's sinful to attempt. And keep in mind, again, the extent this goes to, if you go back to that Westminster Larger Catechism, I mean, the idea is that even if you're hearing the story of the woman caught in adultery, you're not even allowed to have a picture pop into your mind of what Jesus, that represents Jesus. You're not even necessarily thinking legitimately, oh, that's what Jesus looked like, all right? It represents Jesus. Just like when you see an actor portraying Jesus on stage or in a movie, like in a Passion Play or something like that. You don't think that that actor is really what Jesus looked like. That's what the actor looks like, all right? But that actor is representing in this narrative Jesus the same way that the mental picture that pops in our head is representing Jesus. We're not thinking that's exactly what Jesus actually looked like, all right? And so there's no reason to jump and to say, and therefore it's sinful to attempt. Why? Why is it per se sinful just to have an image that in your mind is representing the true Jesus if you're not worshiping that image? And this is what it all gets back down to. This reason, again, just kind of avoids, all of these three reasons kind of avoid that distinction. The second one tried to hit on it, but failed. Avoid the distinction between having an image and worshiping an image, all right? Just because I have an image, even an inaccurate one, if I'm not worshiping it, it's not idolatry, all right? And so that's a long way of saying that, no, I don't think there's any problem per se with that, with having movies or portraying Jesus, God or Jesus in media. Now, before I sign off, though, let me give the one big giant caveat, all right, to all of that. All right, are there dangers to doing it? Absolutely. Absolutely, there are dangers. I was reading one point that Luther, I think at some point, said that, yeah, it's not per se sinful or wrong to do it, but we might be better off if we don't. And so I certainly don't fault anyone who doesn't want to have depictions of Jesus or doesn't want to watch these things. By all means, I don't think it's sinful to do that. And I think there's a lot of good that comes out of these things when done properly. But two big dangers and two big caveats we have to have. Number one is we do tend to get an inaccurate idea of what Jesus's body looked like. All right. I got news for you. Look at all these famous pictures of Jesus hanging around that you're probably used to, where you got this nice Caucasian man with long brown hair and blue eyes. That is not what Jesus looks like. All right. What happened is all these images are, that's the European Jesus. All right. Because the church grew powerful in Europe. And so all these paintings came out that made Jesus look like them. All right. And that's a problem. You shouldn't be trying to make Jesus look like you. You should be trying to be more like Jesus, not in physical appearance, but obviously in your heart. Jesus was a Middle Eastern Jew. All right. And we know just geographically around the world, there are certain physical characteristics that tend to be common in certain areas of the world, especially 2,000 years ago when you didn't have modern transit and all that. All right. Jesus did not have the physical attributes of a European, long brown hair, blue-eyed European. All right. He should look like, their depictions really should look like an ancient Middle Eastern Jew. And he doesn't in most of those paintings. All right. And so for those people that have this image, they legitimately think this is what Jesus looked like. Obviously, that is one danger in creating these images of Jesus, is that we do create this false impression. Now, is it idolatry? No, it's mistaken. But as long as we're not worshiping the image, it's still not idolatry. But it's also not desirable. In that sense, we don't want to be misleading people. We don't want to be creating false impressions in our mind. And the other risk, of course, to allowing these types of depictions of Jesus is well, let's face it, not every depiction of Jesus in the media is created equal, is it? All right. There are some depictions that are very, very non-biblical. And I mean, I think we as a church need to make sure we speak out about those when they come out, because they do create a false impression of Jesus. I can't tell you, you go online right now, the things that people say about Jesus and Christianity. Most of the critics of Christianity I see on Facebook or other social media only demonstrate that they know absolutely nothing about Christianity, virtually. I mean, this idea they have of what Christianity teaches and is all about. Most people think, talk about Christianity as really being a works type of religion where, you do enough good deeds, you get into heaven. That's not Christianity. And so we do see, and some of the false depictions we see go even worse than that. I mean, my mind keeps coming back. There was a movie back in the 1980s, I believe it was, starring Willem Dafoe called The Last Temptation of Christ. If you haven't seen it, don't. I'm not going to recommend it to you. It is a horrible depiction of Jesus, a completely blasphemous, heretical, and just historically false depiction of Jesus Christ. But there are people that see that movie and somehow think, oh, well, maybe there's some truth to that. It's no different than like the Da Vinci Code. People put credibility in that. It had no credibility whatsoever in the historical assertions that were made. And so there are dangers, obviously, to allowing depictions of Jesus. And so for that reason, I'm very sympathetic to anyone who doesn't want to show them, to see them. You don't want to have pictures on your church. You don't want to have pictures hanging on your wall. I get it. All right. And I'm fine with that because I do agree that there are these dangers. I don't, however, think it's sinful. I don't think it is a violation of the second commandment for all the reasons we've gone through, as long as you're not worshiping that image, because that's what the second commandment was truly getting at, just acts of worship. All right. So with that being said, I think I've talked everybody's ear off that's actually listening to this either live or after the fact. So those of you that are online, thank you very much for joining us. You're watching this after the fact there. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to give one more quick reminder here that if you do have a question that you would like to see answered here on a future episode of Hey, Ask Me Stuff, send it to that address on the screen. Well, specifically, there's a form on that address that you can submit your question to, and we will take a look at all those that are submitted and keep them in mind for future episodes. I also tell you that next, we're going to be doing this every Tuesday night at 6:30. So again, please come on and join the conversation. Next Tuesday night, we will not be having an episode because next Tuesday is Independence Day, the 4th of July, and the church is closed at that point in time. So I will not be here doing an episode. We will be back in 2 weeks. Now, sometimes it'll be like this. Well, probably most of the time it'll be like this. It'll just be me talking and answering the questions. Not all the time. As a matter of fact, I don't have it all nailed down yet, but I believe it's that week we come back. July 11th would be the following Tuesday. The next Tuesday we have one of these episodes. I am thinking we're going to have more people on the show than just me. I'll still be in here in the studio, the control room side of things, and then they'll all be sitting over there in the studio side of things, and we can switch back and forth with multiple cameras. And so I do think we'll have some guests for that show, and probably some other future shows on down the road as well. Hey, as I mentioned at the top, if you haven't done it already, if you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel, why not? Come on, go subscribe, please. We're trying to get to 2,000 subscribers, and we can only do that if you all help us out. And share the video, tell other people about it. We really, really greatly appreciate it. And again, I'm going to apologize for me having to look off and push all these buttons, but it's all on me. I'm doing everything myself. All right. So, hey, thank you very much for joining us, everybody. And hopefully we'll see you back here again in 2 weeks for our next episode of Hey, Ask Me Stuff. I'll let you know right now, kind of spoiler alert, the plan right now is we're going to be talking that week about should Christians listen to secular music, to non-Christian music. All right. We'll see over the next 2 weeks. That could shape up a little bit differently. But as of right now, that's the plan for what we're going to be talking about. So thanks again for joining us. God bless. See you in a couple of weeks.